At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's General G. Let's begin. The first rule of deep space salvage, etched into the mind of every hauler and wrecker scraping a living from the galaxy's graveyards, is that you never, ever cut into something you don't understand. The second rule, a bitter lesson learned from decades of simmering conflict, is that Vadran military hardware is built by arrogant engineers who believe the first rule is an unbreakable law of the universe, a law they alone are qualified to write, and for whom they write it. On the bridge of the salvage hauler Scrap Heap, the second rule was about to be put to the ultimate test. The ship itself was a testament to a life lived in defiance of warranties and recommended operating procedures. The deck plates vibrated with a discordant hum of overworked machinery. The air, thick with the scent of recycled oxygen, hot metal, and spilled coffee, tasted of grit and desperation. Every console was a patchwork of original parts and cannibalized tech from a dozen different manufacturers, its screens displaying a chaotic but functional collage of data. "Kenna, you sure about this spot?" Captain Corey Vane's voice was as calm as the starless gulf between systems, a low, steady anchor in the shriek of industrial cutting laser that was her ship's primary tool. That tool was currently biting into the dark, colossal sphere hanging in the view screen before them. The object defied the definition of a moon, yet its scale demanded the comparison. It was a superstructure the size of a minor asteroid, a perfect sphere of material so profoundly black it seemed to drink the light of the distant stars, leaving a patch of absolute nothingness in the sky. It was a hole in reality. On Corey's main screen, a spider web of molten metal glowed cherry red against the weapon's hull, the only color in a universe of black and white. A crackle of static, followed by a voice, buzzing with the kind of glee usually reserved for a physicist discovering a new universal constant. "Vadran engineering follows a rigid modular design philosophy, Captain. It's all straight lines and right angles, even on a sphere. Absolute faith in their own perfection. I found the public specs for their Class Z power core installation, the kind they use in their orbital monuments on Ethelberg. They use the exact same core module for the bomb. They never imagined someone would be stupid enough or desperate enough to get close enough to access the maintenance port." Corey allowed herself a small, grim smile. Stupid was a matter of perspective. The Vadran Dominion had parked this thing, the Oblivion Core, just outside the Sol System's gravity well. They had hijacked every comms channel in the known galaxy to broadcast a simple, chilling message, a 24-hour countdown, a live execution. The galaxy was commanded to watch humanity's last day, a lesson in obedience delivered at the end of a plasma cannon. 14 hours into that countdown, the salvage convoy Scrap Heap and its two brutish tow rigs, the Goliath and the Titan, both little more than oversized engines with grappling claws and a cockpit bolted on, had arrived. They were the only humans close enough and, as Dr. Kenna O'Connell so eloquently put it, stupid enough to try something. "Hull integrity at the incision point is dropping," came a gravelly two-word report from the weapons station. Gunnery Sergeant Tadlor Stone, callsign Grizzly, sat in a custom-built command chair that looked more like a throne of war, surrounded by weapons monitoring screens. He spoke only when necessary, and usually to announce something was about to explode. He was a slab of granite in human form, his scarred face impassive as he watched the energy readings from the laser. "Nash, keep us steady," Corey ordered, her eyes never leaving the screen. The call sign Wrench suited her. She was the one who held this entire chaotic operation together. "The moment we're through, I want you inside, fast and loud." "You know any other way, Captain?" Nash, Comet Kellen's voice was pure, uncut bravado, crackling over the comm from the cockpit of his scout ship. The view from his camera, patched into Corey's secondary screen, showed the nose of his nimble craft, the Stingray, aimed at the glowing wound in the bomb's side like a dart poised to hit a bullseye. His hands rested lightly on the controls, ready to unleash the scout's full power at a moment's notice. The laser's whine pitched higher, a keening scream of focused energy that made the fillings in Corey's teeth ache. Then it stopped. The sudden, profound silence was more jarring than the noise. A section of the hull, 20 meters across, sagged inward, glowing like a dying ember. It hung for a moment, then tumbled silently into the darkness within. A perfect gaping maw had been carved into the doomsday weapon. "That's our invitation," Corey said, her voice a low command. "Nash, you're on. Grizzly, Kenna, prep for entry. Let's not keep our hosts waiting." "See that? Perfect entry," Nash yelled over the comm, his voice a mix of adrenaline and pure joy as he slammed the Stingray's thrusters to full. The little ship shot through the opening like a bullet fired from a railgun, its engines painting a brief, brilliant blue streak against the absolute black. Corey switched her comms to the convoy channel, her gaze sweeping over the crew. Tadlor was already rising, the deck groaning under his weight. Kenna was double-checking the connections on a diagnostic kit that looked like a science experiment gone wonderfully wrong. "All right, you heard him. Let's go rattle the cage." Instead of the chaotic tangle of wires and conduits they expected, the interior of the Oblivion Core revealed a cathedral of pristine white corridors and silent floating service platforms. The air was sterile, cold, and still. The architecture was all clean lines and soaring arches, a monument to a culture that saw beauty in cold, unyielding logic. It was elegant, utterly soulless, and, as they quickly discovered, very well defended. The moment Nash's scout ship touched down on an interior maintenance deck, its landing struts making the only sound in the cavernous space, sleek, disc-shaped drones materialized from the hidden panels in the walls. They emerged without a whisper, their single red optical sensors glowing with malevolent intent. Plasma bolts began to lance through the space, their passage marked by a faint, sharp hiss in the thin atmosphere as they superheated the air. "Pest control is on station," Nash shouted, diving from his cockpit and sliding behind a thick support pillar. He came up with a pair of pulse pistols, but he was a pilot, not a soldier. His best weapon was his motion, a fluid grace that made him a difficult target. Gunnery Sergeant Stone, clumping down the ramp of the much larger scrap heap moments later, was the opposite. He was a human mountain clad in scarred, custom-built exo-armor, carrying a rotary plasma cannon that rightfully belonged on a gunship. The weapon, affectionately named the Argument Ender, was half his size. He didn't need cover, he was cover. The cannon whined to life, a sound like a hornet's nest the size of a planet, and unleashed a torrent of incandescent fury. White composite plating vaporized under the onslaught. Drones designed to be untouchable specters of death shattered into 1,000 pieces of molten shrapnel. "Grizzly, if you scratch my ride, you're buying me a new one," Nash yelled, zipping from one piece of cover to another on a Vadron maintenance scooter he'd hotwired in under 10 seconds. It hovered silently, a testament to Vadron grace, until Nash started yanking it into stomach-churning turns that defied the craft's listed inertial dampening limits. "If you don't hold still," Tadlor grunted, his massive frame pivoting with surprising speed to track a new wave of drones emerging from the ceiling, "I'll use your escape pod for target practice." He punctuated the sentence with a sustained burst that cored 3 drones in a single beautiful line of melting metal. While the 2 men conducted their violent, unchoreographed ballet of destruction, Kenna O'Connell, dragging a heavily modified diagnostics kit on a floating pallet, scurried past them. Corey moved with her, providing cover fire, her pistol shots methodical and deliberate. Kenna wore a simple ship's suit, her hair a frantic explosion of curls, her eyes wide with a manic brilliance that bordered on insanity. She wasn't looking at the drones or the plasma fire, she was looking at the walls, the floor, the very architecture of the place. "Incredible," she muttered to herself, tapping a console on her kit. "The power conduits are woven directly into the superstructure. Every component serves a dozen functions. Every pathway is optimized to the nanometer. Oh, the sheer arrogant perfection of the design." "Kenna, focus," Corey said calmly, firing a single shot from her sidearm that punched through a drone's primary optical sensor, sending it spinning into a bulkhead. "The God Toaster, remember?" Right, hot wiring the divine appliance." Kendra shook her head, a grin plastered on her face. "This way. The central nexus should be just past this junction." They fought their way through another corridor, the pristine white walls now scorched black with plasma burns and pockmarked by Tadler's handiwork. They reached a vast, spherical chamber. In its center, suspended in a web of crackling energy fields, was the core's control nexus, a perfect seamless sphere of polished chrome that reflected the carnage around it in a distorted fisheye lens. "No ports, no terminals, no keyboards," Nash said, sliding his scooter to a halt. "How are we supposed to hack that?" Kenna just laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. "Hack it? Oh, you adorable simpleton. Software duels are for hackers in clean rooms. This calls for percussive maintenance." She pointed to the base of the energy pylon feeding the nexus. "Vadrans are masters of energy, but they still have to run physical lines for maintenance overrides. It's galactic standard code." She patted a heavy-duty crowbar strapped to her kit. "And this is my skeleton key." While Tadlor laid down a curtain of suppressive fire, turning the corridor behind them into an impassable wall of plasma, Kenna went to work. She jammed the crowbar into a hairline seam at the base of the pylon and heaved. The metal groaned in protest, a high, piercing sound in the sudden lull between cannon bursts. "Come on, you glorious, over-engineered piece of junk," she grunted, putting her entire body weight into it. Pistol steady, Corey stood over her, picking off drones that strayed too close, each shot a carefully placed burst of energy. "Status?" "Almost there." With a screech of tormented metal, a panel popped open, revealing a thick bundle of fiber optic cables, pulsing with soft white light. It was the Vadran equivalent of a central nervous system. Kenna didn't hesitate. She grabbed a device from her kit that looked like a monstrous metal spider with a dozen mismatched cables for legs. It was a crude human-made universal interface, bristling with exposed wires, alligator clips, and what looked suspiciously like the salvaged core of a coffee maker. "Okay, you magnificent bastard," she whispered to the Vadran Nexus. "Let's see how your delicate sensibilities handle a brute force data shove." She jammed the interface into the bundle of cables. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The pristine white light of the chamber flared violently, then shifted to a screaming emergency red. A klaxon, deep and resonant, began to blare, a sound that vibrated in their bones. The energy field around the Nexus flickered and spat. On a nearby console, Vadran script scrolled at a speed that blurred the characteristics into meaningless streaks. "What's happening?" Nash shouted over the noise. "It's panicking!" Kenna yelled, her face illuminated by the flashing red lights, her expression one of ecstatic discovery. "The Vadran AI is so rigid, so perfect, it has no procedure for an error this messy. It's like trying to explain poetry to a calculator. Its logic circuits are frying. It's dumping its primary functions and shunting everything into a fail-safe diagnostic mode." As she spoke, the security parameters across the weapon began to drop. The drone deployment ports slammed shut with a clang of finality. The interior lights flickered erratically. The entire station seized. "This is our window!" Kenna's left hand steadied her rig while her right hand blurred across the input panel, her fingers striking keys in rapid, complex sequences that bypassed the AI's initial lockdown queries. "It's lowering its firewalls to run the diagnostics. It thinks I'm a friendly technician. Oh, you poor, stupid, beautiful machine. I'm in." A moment later, the screaming klaxon cut out. The red lights died, replaced by a steady, calm blue. Kenna slumped against the pylon, breathing heavily, a triumphant grin on her face. "Captain," she said, her voice filled with reverence, "I have the keys to the apocalypse." "Minimal power to the primary maneuvering thrusters," Corey ordered from the scrap heap's bridge. "Just enough to give us some steerage." "Rerouting now," Kenna confirmed from her makeshift station, now physically wired into the Oblivion Core's command nexus. Her corner of the bridge was a rat's nest of cables and auxiliary screens. "It's like trying to sip from a fire hose, but I think I've got it under control." Outside, in the silent dark, Nash was on an EVA. his small figure dwarfed by the sheer scale of the operation. He directed the lumbering tow rig, the Goliath, as it approached the colossal weapon. "Easy now, big girl. Just a little closer. We don't want to scratch the paint on this thing. Might void the warranty." Massive magnetic tow clamps, each the size of a small building, extended from the Goliath. The bomb's external defense turrets, their targeting systems thrown into disarray by Kenneth's hack, fired sporadically. Beams of plasma shot out at random vectors, slicing harmlessly through empty space. One, however, lanced unexpectedly close to Nash. "Whoa, that one tickled my backside," he yelped, tumbling out of the way with a panicked burst from his suit thrusters. "Stay focused, Comet," Corey's voice cut through his comms, a sharp edge of command in her tone. "Focused, right." He steadied himself, the starfield spinning to a halt around him. "Okay, Goliath, you're in the green. Engage clamps on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark." With a deep metallic thud that resonated through the hulls of all their ships, the clamps locked onto the Oblivion core. A series of secondary grapples followed from the Titan. They had it. They had actually leashed a doomsday weapon. "Clamps are secure," Nash reported, his voice tight with awe. "We are hard docked to the biggest, baddest bomb in the history of everything. What now, Captain?" Corey looked at the star chart on her main screen. A single, blinking icon marked their home, Earth. Then she looked at the countdown timer displayed in the corner. 9 hours and 27 minutes remaining. "Now," she said, a dangerous glint in her eye, "we make our delivery." On the bridge of the Vadran Dominion flagship, the Will of Aethel, Grand Admiral Malcor watched the energy readings from the Oblivion core with a smirk. The readings were erratic, chaotic. He could picture it perfectly. The technological infants were hammering away at the hull with their crude mining tools, a pathetic act of defiance before their inevitable extinction. The display was almost poetic. "They struggle, Grand Admiral," his sub-commander noted, his voice laced with the sycophantic tone common to Vadran officers. "Like insects trapped in amber." "Let them struggle," Malcor said, taking a leisurely sip of a steaming aromatic beverage. "Their flailing only serves to amplify the lesson we are teaching the galaxy today. The lesson of absolute power. That resistance is not just futile, it is an absurdity." "Ha ha!" He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. His subordinates chuckled with him, a practiced chorus of agreement. His amusement, however, was cut short by a sudden alert from the sensor officer. "Grand Admiral, I am detecting a change in the Oblivion core's orbital position." Malcor raised a single skeptical eyebrow. "Explain." "It is moving, sir, away from the human homeworld. It appears to be under propulsion." The Grand Admiral set his cup down with a sharp click. On the main view screen, the display resolved into a clearer image. He saw the Oblivion core, a symbol of his power and his people's technological supremacy, and latched onto it like stubborn barnacles on the hull of a great leviathan was a cluster of ugly, asymmetrical human ships. Their engines flared, and with agonizing slowness they began to pull. They were towing his ultimate weapon out of orbit. The smug laughter died on the bridge of the Will of Aethel. A single, horrified silence replaced it. Grand Admiral Malcor stared, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were showing him. The upstarts weren't trying to destroy the bomb, they were stealing it. Corey stood in the Oblivion core's primary communication hub. It was a cavernous chamber designed to broadcast Vadran propaganda and countdowns to every corner of the galaxy. Kenna had it purring under her control. "Every channel, open and unsecured?" Corey asked. "Broadcasting on a frequency wide enough to make a star blush," Kenna confirmed, giving her a thumbs up. "The whole galaxy is still tuned in, waiting for the boom. They're about to get a very different show." Corey stepped in front of the broadcast lens. Tadlor stood beside her, holding a large circular plate of Vadran alloy he'd ripped from an interior wall. It was emblazoned with the proud, angular insignia of the Dominion. He'd polished it with his sleeve. The transmission went live, Corey's face, calm and resolute, appeared on screens in military command centers, back alley bars, and royal courts across thousands of light years. She held up the insignia plate. "To the Vadran Dominion," she said, her voice clear and steady. "You seem to have misplaced this. We're bringing it back." She nodded to Kenna. The transmission cut out. For a long moment, the crew was silent. Then Nash's laughter erupted over the comms. "Oh, you should have seen their faces. I had a tap on their flagship's internal comms. I don't think they have a word for what just happened." "They'll find one," Corey said, turning to the star chart Kenna had projected onto the wall. "And it will probably be followed by a lot of plasma cannons." "There," Nash said, pointing to a straight, clean line on the chart that led from their current position directly to Ethelberg. "The Inner System Express. We could be there in 3 rotations. Get in, drop the package, get out." Corey shook her head. "No, the Express is the first place they'll expect us. They have fleets waiting at every junction." Her finger traced a different path, one that led into a chaotic, swirling mess of cosmic dust and stellar nurseries marked on the charts with a single ominous label: the Tattered Veil. It was a region pirates and smugglers used precisely because military fleets with their rigid FTL navigation regulations couldn't navigate it safely. "We are not going around the storm," she said. "We are going through it." Tadlor, who had been quietly observing, gave a single sharp grunt of approval. That was as good as a standing ovation from him. "Through the veil?" Nash's eyes lit up. "Towing a city killer? Captain, you do know how to show a guy a good time." The decision was made. They altered their course, plunging toward the violent, unpredictable currents of the nebula. Meanwhile, hundreds of light years away, on the bridge of the Hyran Confederacy flagship Claw of Retribution, an admiral watched the recording of the human broadcast for the 3rd time. The Hyran admiral possessed no eyes. Its head was a smooth, chitinous cowl from which sprouted a crown of feathery, vibrating filaments that tasted the air, light, and radiation of the room, constructing a complex picture of its surroundings from a symphony of inputs humans couldn't even perceive. A series of slow, deliberate clicks from its thorax echoed on the bridge, the Hyran equivalent of a smile. The Vadran Dominion had been a thorn in the Confederacy's side for centuries. "The humans," the Admiral resonated, its voice a series of soft, melodic chords produced by a resonating throat pouch. "They are either the bravest or most foolish species I have ever encountered." "Perhaps both, Admiral." "Indeed." The Admiral's filaments quivered in amusement. "Order the fleets to our shared border with the Dominion. Full alert status. I want our ship's position to observe, and perhaps to take advantage of any sudden political vacancies." The galaxy had held its breath for humanity's execution. Now it held its breath for the Vadran response. No one was disappointed. An armada of unprecedented size began to burn a path from the Sol system, its target clear: the impudent little salvage crew who had stolen their thunder. The Tattered Veil was a nightmare, a cosmic storm of gravitational eddies and sensor-ghosting dust clouds. It was also home to the lawless, the desperate, and the predatory. The first to find them were the Crimson Corsairs, a pirate clan notorious for their reckless swarm tactics. A dozen misshapen, heavily armed ships dropped out of the nebula's haze, their weapons blazing. "Hostiles inbound!" Tadlor's voice was a low growl. "Finally, some target practice." The turrets on the scrap heap, Goliath, and Titan roared to life, spitting streams of kinetic shells into the approaching swarm. But they were outnumbered, and worse, they were slow, burdened by the colossal mass of the Oblivion core. "They're boxing us in!" Nash shouted, his hands a blur over the controls of the Stingray, which he was piloting remotely from the scrap heap's bridge. "I can't outrun them all while we're dragging this anchor." Corey's eyes were darting across the main screen where red triangles swarmed their own green icons. She saw the pirates' movements, the gravitational currents of the nebula, and the massive celestial body they were towing. And in that chaos, she saw an opportunity. "Nash," she said, her voice cutting through the noise, "you're not going to outrun them. You're going to use the anchor." Nash paused. A slow grin spread across his face. Oh, I see. Kenna, can you give me a quick release on the Titan's port side tow cable? On it, Kenna replied, her fingers dancing across a terminal. Captain, Nash said, his voice buzzing with excitement. Time to show 'em a gravity whip maneuver they don't teach at the academy. You see this? You're going to want to see this. He fired the Stingray's thrusters, pulling into a wide flanking arc. At the same time, the Goliath and Scrap Heap fired their main engines at full power, beginning a slow, ponderous turn. The Oblivion core, tethered by the tow cables, began to swing out like a wrecking ball on a galactic-sized chain. Two Corsair frigates, moving in for a pincer attack, found themselves directly in its path. Their pilots could only watch in horror as a literal mountain of weaponized alloy bore down on them. They were too close to evade, their engines screaming as they tried to reverse thrust against the inevitable. "Release cable!" Corey snapped. Kenna slammed a button. The Titan's portside cable detached. The sudden shift in momentum caused the Oblivion core to lurch, its trajectory changing just enough to swing directly into the pirate's flight path. There was no sound, only the horrifying sight of two warships being utterly annihilated, crushed into scrap metal and vaporized by the sheer kinetic force of the impact. A silent, brilliant fireball erupted where they had been. "Scratch two," Tadlor grunted, almost sounding pleased. The remaining pirates, seeing their prey turn into the universe's largest flail, broke off their attack and vanished back into the nebulous mists. Nash's whoop of victory echoed across the comms. "Did you see that? Tell me you saw that." The aftermath of the pirate attack left them battered. During the frantic repairs, Kenna O'Connell had her eureka moment. She was deep in the Oblivion core's engineering section, her face smudged with grease, trying to patch a power conduit that had been grazed by a plasma bolt. As she worked, she felt it, a slow, constant hum of almost limitless energy emanating from the singularity at the heat of the weapon. "It's just bleeding power," she murmured, looking at her scanner. "The containment field is 99.999% stable, but for a contained singularity, that remaining fraction is still more energy than a star puts out in a year." An idea, wild and dangerous and utterly brilliant, sparked in her mind. She sprinted back to the Scrap Heap's bridge, waving a data slate. "Captain, wrench, I've got it!" Corey looked up from a damage report. "Got what, Kenna? A solution to the flickering lights or a new theory on the origin of the universe?" "Better," Kenna declared, her eyes shining. "We've been towing this thing, fighting its inertia, dragging it like dead weight. We've been thinking like haulers. We need to start thinking like parasites." She threw up a complex energy schematic onto the main screen. "The Vadrans built this thing to be self-sufficient for centuries. I can shunt the containment field's bleed off directly into our capacitor bus. It's the dirtiest power in the galaxy, and it's all ours. We don't need to use our own reactors. We can siphon its power. We won't just be towing the Oblivion core, we'll be powered by it." Corey stared at the schematic, then at Kenna's manic grin. Nash, leaning over the console, let out a low whistle. "You want to hotwire the bomb to juice up our rust buckets? Kenna, you're my hero." "It's a terrible, insane, and probably suicidal idea," Corey said, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Do it." A montage of beautiful blue-collar chaos began. Under Kenna's frenzied direction, the crew began retrofitting their ships. Heavy-duty power conduits glowing with a pulsating, otherworldly energy were crudely welded onto the hulls of the Scrap Heap, Goliath, and Titan. They snaked from the access port they'd cut in the Oblivion core, latching onto the human ships like giant, incandescent umbilical cords. The change was immediate and dramatic. The familiar orange burn of the human ship's engines shifted to an alien Vadran purple, burning hotter and brighter than ever before. On the bridge of the Scrap Heap, the main power meter shot into the red and stayed there. But the power was dirty. It was raw, untamed energy, designed for Vadran systems, not cobbled together human junkers. Consoles sparked and spat acrid smoke. Lights flickered in an eerie blue-white. Systems overloaded and reset at random. Nash found himself having to manually reset with his flight controls every few minutes, as ghost signals from the raw power feed tried to jerk his ship off course. Tadlor found himself with a new recurring duty. Every hour or so, an electrical fire would erupt from a secondary power junction near his station. Without a word, he would grab a fire extinguisher, blast the flames into submission with a cloud of chemical foam, and then return to monitoring his weapon systems as if nothing had happened. After the fifth time, he simply kept the extinguisher by his feet. They were faster, stronger, and more dangerous than ever before. They were also a hair's breadth away from catastrophic system-wide failure at any given moment. It was, Nash declared, the most fun he'd ever had. Their souped-up convoy soon attracted a more professional class of predator. The Starbreakers, a mercenary guild with a reputation for cold, calculated operations, had taken the Dominion's lucrative bounty. They didn't use swarm tactics, they laid traps. They found the perfect spot, a dense asteroid field where the nebulous currents were particularly treacherous. They seeded the field with proximity mines and positioned their heavy cruisers in a tight kill box at the only clear exit. Corey saw it coming. "That exit path is too clean," she murmured, studying the sensor readings on her screens, which showed a suspicious lack of debris in one vector. "It's an invitation to a funeral. Kenna, how are those new engine mods holding up?" "They're energetically enthusiastic," Kenna replied cheerily, "and dangerously unstable. Why?" "Because we're not going through their kill box," Corey said, her gaze fixed on the sensor display. She highlighted a dense cluster of asteroids. "We are not going to try and weave through that mess. We are going to make our own lane. Grizzly, slave the point defense cannons to my command. Nash, full forward thrust. We're punching through." Nash's grin was visible even over the comms. "A straight-up drag race through the rocks? Now you're speaking my language, Captain." The operation was less a flight and more a barely controlled demolition. With their engines now supercharged by Vadran power, the convoy accelerated with terrifying force. Corey's fingers danced across her console, directing a continuous, blistering barrage from their point defense cannons. Asteroids the size of houses vaporized into clouds of dust and pebbles before they could impact. The convoy didn't dodge, it plowed, creating a corridor of raw destruction through the heart of the field. The Starbreakers watched, dumbfounded, as the human convoy, wreathed in purple fire, and the explosions of obliterated asteroids, tore a new, violent path through their trap. They emerged on the other side battered, sparking, but very much intact. They escaped, leaving the mercenaries to explain to the Vadran Dominion how they'd been outmaneuvered by a bunch of salvagers in ships that were actively on fire. On the bridge of the Will of Aethel, Grand Admiral Malcor was incandescent with rage. The reports of the humans' progress through the tattered veil were an affront to logic, a personal insult to his strategic genius. "They are acting like vermin, scuttling through the filth of the galaxy," he spat. A junior officer, young and tragically ambitious, saw an opportunity to impress. "Grand Admiral, if I may, I have plotted an unconventional hyperspace jump. We could micro-jump directly into the veil, cutting them off at this choke point. It is risky, but it would allow us to intercept them." Malcor turned his cold reptilian gaze upon the officer. The bridge grew silent. "Risky?" he hissed. "The Vadran Dominion does not engage in risky maneuvers. We do not stoop to the gutter tactics of pirates and scavengers. We are the masters of open space. Our might is demonstrated through overwhelming, honorable force, not through cowardly ambushes in a cosmic slum." He pointed a long, sharp finger at the officer. "You speak the language of cowards and fools. You are demoted. Remove this tactician from my bridge." The disgraced officer was hauled away. Malcor turned back to the main screen. "We will continue our pursuit on the far side of the veil. We will meet them in open space, where Vadran might prevails. We will crush them where the entire galaxy can see our righteous power, not hide in the shadows like them." His rigid adherence to dogma, his unwavering belief in the Vadran way of war, had become his greatest weakness. He was preparing for a war of honor and tradition against an enemy that had just hotwired a doomsday weapon with a coffee maker and a crowbar. When the scrap heap convoy finally dropped out of hyperspace, exiting the tattered veil, they were met with a sight that silenced even Nash. Aethelberg, a jewel of a world, shrouded in orbital rings and cities that were not built, but woven from light-conducting alloys, forming structures that followed the planet's magnetic fields in vast glowing tapestries. And arrayed between them and the planet was the entire Vadran home fleet. Hundreds of sleek, deadly warships formed a blockade of staggering scale. Their pristine silver hulls gleamed, a stark contrast to the scorched, scarred, and jury-rigged plating of the human ships. For the first time since their insane mission began, the crew on the bridge of the scrap heap was utterly, completely silent. They had poked the hornet's nest. Now the entire swarm had come out to greet them. Tadlor broke the silence. "That's a lot of targets." Corey's lips twitched into a faint smile. The moment of awe was over. "Kenna, get ready. Nash, find us a good parking spot." A hail came through from the Vadran flagship. Grand Admiral Malcor's face appeared on their screen, his expression a mask of cold fury. "You pathetic thieves! Your journey ends here. Surrender to the Oblivion Core, and we may grant you a swift death." Corey looked at his image, then gestured to her comms officer. "Decline call." She turned to Nash. "You heard the man. He wants his toy back. Let's put it somewhere he can't miss it." Under Nash's expert piloting, the entire convoy lurched forward, pushing the Oblivion Core not towards the fleet, but towards the planet. They didn't enter the atmosphere, but they came terrifyingly close, muscling the dark sphere into a low but stable geosynchronous orbit directly over the planet's gleaming capital city. It hung there in the sky like a new malevolent god, a permanent, undeniable monument to the Dominion's failure. A shadow fell over the heart of their empire. Corey reopened the channel to Malcor. His face was no longer just furious, it was apoplectic. "Come and get it," she said, and cut the transmission. The standoff did not last long. Malcor, his pride shredded, his capital city held hostage by his own weapon, gave the one order he had left. "Annihilate them!" The Vadran fleet surged forward, and the space over their own planet erupted into a chaotic free-for-all. What should have been a slaughter became a lethal strategic ballet. The human convoy, hopelessly outgunned, used the colossal weapon as mobile cover. This was a slow, deliberate game of positioning. Nash would initiate a long, ponderous rotation of the Oblivion Core, using its immense mass to shield them from the main guns of one battle group, forcing the Vadran fleet to constantly reposition. This gave Tadlor precious seconds to acquire a lock on an exposed cruiser. "Target locked," he would grunt. A moment later, another Vadran ship would blossom into silent fire. But they couldn't keep it up forever. They were taking hits. Alarms blared along the bridge as their shields flickered and died. "Shields are gone," Nash shouted. "Hull integrity at 60% and dropping." "Wrench, it's time," Kenna called out, her station sparking violently. "It's now or never." Corey looked at the swirling mosh pit of a battle around them. They had made their point. Now it was time to leave a lasting impression. She keyed her comm. "All right, Kenna, light the candle." Kenna's fingers flew, initiating the final desperate sequence she had prepared. Over the internal comms, her voice was calm, but laced with a frantic energy. The voice of a scientist about to test her wildest hypothesis. "Okay, listen up, everyone. This is the fun part. The Vadrans think their bomb is just that, a bomb, a big, dumb explosion. But the Singularity Core is a precision instrument. I'm not cracking the egg. I'm collapsing the chronotron particle containment on a single axis. I'm focusing the core's natural emission into a directed burst. It's a shape-charged EMP, aimed right at the fleet." "And us?" Corey asked, her hands gripping her command chair as the ship shuddered from another hit. "Won't that fry us too?" "That's the really fun part," Kenna replied, cackling. "Time to polarize the hull. We're dumping our main capacitor charge directly into the outer plating. It'll create a temporary, chaotic magnetic shield, a bubble of pure energy. It should deflect the worst of the pulse, but, and this is a big but, it's going to fry every non-essential system we have. We'll be dark for a few seconds, so hold on to your butts. Corey could see the energy building on Kenna's screen, a terrifying spike of power being drawn from the heart of the Oblivion core. "Do it!" she commanded. On her console, Kenna slammed her palm down on a large, crudely wired red button. There was no sound, no flash of light. There was only a wave, an invisible, silent tsunami of energy that erupted from the Oblivion core. The human ship shuddered violently. Every light on the bridge of the scrap heap died at once, plunging them into absolute darkness and silence. The hum of the life support, the chatter of the consoles, the scream of the alarms, all gone. For 3 terrifying seconds, they were adrift in a dead ship. Then, with a groan of protesting metal, the emergency power kicked in. Red battle lights flickered on, casting long, eerie shadows across the bridge. Across the intervening space, the effect was far more dramatic. The Vadran home fleet, a moment ago a symphony of light and deadly energy, went silent. Every ship, from the smallest fighter to Malkor's flagship, went dead. Their engines sputtered out, their weapon ports went dark. Their lights blinked out one by one until hundreds of warships were nothing more than silent, powerless hulks, drifting in the dark. The battle ended not with a bang, but with a sudden, deafening silence. In the eerie quiet of a disabled star system, Corey's voice broadcast one last time from the scrap heap's emergency comms, a signal aimed directly at the dead bridge of the Will of Aethel. "This is yours. We're billing you for the delivery fee. Services rendered include de-infestation of automated defense systems, comprehensive systems diagnostics, and premium cross-galaxy delivery through hazardous territory. You'll also find charges for fuel, munitions, and significant emotional distress. A detailed invoice is being transmitted now, attached to your flagship's primary data port. We recommend paying it promptly." She nodded to Nash. "Detach the clamps." With a series of soft thuds, the tow cables and grapples released. Their convoy, scarred and barely functional, pulled away from the silent Oblivion core, leaving it hanging over the Vadran capital like a promise. The final scene was on the bridge of the scrap heap. The ship was a mess of sparking consoles and foam from Tadlor's extinguisher, but it was alive. The crew, bruised, exhausted, and covered in grime, passed around a bottle of very old, very potent whiskey Corey kept for special occasions. Nash took a long pull and grinned, a smear of grease on his cheek. "So, what's our next salvage job?" Corey took the bottle, her eyes on the starfield ahead as the convoy prepared to jump. "I think we can afford to take a little time off." Kenna raised her flask. "To ingenuity, improvisation, and hot-wiring the apocalypse." Tadlor, for his part, just grunted, but it was a satisfied grunt. The ships of the scrap heap convoy dissolved into the star-streaked tunnel of hyperspace, leaving behind a system in chaos, an empire in disgrace, and a galaxy in stunned, terrified awe. The story of the day the backwater humans didn't just stare down the galaxy's strongest power, but stole their biggest gun and delivered it back to them had already begun to spread. Humanity's reputation was about to change forever for the better.